Welcome to the Marriage Puzzle Podcast with Julie and Thomas Hobby. We are marriage coaches who help couples with pain points about money, intimacy, and communication go from being overwhelmed to being secure in their marriage.
If this is your first time listening to us, thanks for checking out our podcast. And don't forget to subscribe and leave us a rating and a review. Let's dive into this episode.
Hey everyone, thanks for hanging out with us again. Last episode was super fun because Thomas and I kind of candidly talked about why we think our marriage works. And one of the reasons is maybe sex.
Maybe. Yeah.
So I'm like, hey, let's talk about that. And we recently even posted on our social medias like 6 questions to discuss with your spouse about sex. So, you know, you're married, you can have sex. You would think everyone does it, but as we coach couples, with marriage coaching, you can kind of find out like that starts slipping, honestly. And then it's just because we say what sex, communication, and finances are like the 3 pillars of every relationship. And so this is why it's important.
Yeah, it really is. And I think one of the big things surrounding that is being able to communicate about it.
Right.
And because like you said, it can tend to go stale or can tend to just, fizzle out over time if you don't make it a priority in your marriage. And if you don't make communicating about it with each other a priority in your marriage, that's where things drastically take a turn. Right. And so making sure that you're communicating about it is going to be key. It's going to be key to just knowing what each other enjoys and knowing that you're still staying engaged with your spouse in that area. So I think it's vital. So we've got 6 questions for you. So we're basically taking our social media post that we did and we're expanding it into a podcast. And we're not going to, like in the last episode, if you listen to that, we kind of answered live. We're not going to be answering these questions live, so to speak.
Yeah. That's
but
for you and
these questions are for you. We're just going to expand on them a little bit in terms of why these questions are beneficial and how they can help you.
Yeah, so if you need them in note form, you can scroll down and find them at Marriage Puzzle, Instagram and Facebook, but we'll give them to you here. And I would say if you're the only person listening to this episode, maybe you can share it with your spouse and say, hey, tonight or whenever, like set a time, a place to discuss these. Like, hey, let's ask each other these questions or let's unpack this. Not when you're like going into the moment and the physical acts, because that's just awkward and weird. Like you're allowed to talk about sex like with clothes on, as you should. And it just helps set the stage for that intimate moment.
Yeah, I mean, you made a good point about not trying to talk about it right before, like as you're going into it. But I mean, you could say like, hey, I'd like to talk about these, and then there will be a reward afterwards. Like you could go that route, so that it's like, hey, this could be, an interesting, an awkward conversation that we've not had, but it doesn't have to be. In all reality, we've had these conversations with each other before.
Yeah. And
it really just brings the intimacy that much closer to get to that point.
I think that's our heart behind this too. Like we're going to give you these 6 questions. Like Thomas said, we're not going to answer what I would say, what he would say. But we have talked about that. And that's been huge because we've been married for almost 18 years and sex hasn't always been awesome. Hasn't always been, I don't know. I think there were just different expectations and, so we'd like tiptoe around the feelings and like, and that's why, once we started talking about it and asking each other questions and listening and then, over time, like applying that, that's where we got to this moment.
Yeah. You have to create a safe space to have this conversation because you don't know, I mean, you should know your background, your spouse's background, how they grew up, what they knew, what they didn't know and things like that. But if you are, if you're not making it feel like a safe space, then this conversation isn't going to go well. So you have to both be willing to be open, and maybe this isn't all 6 of these questions in one night.
Oh yeah.
Maybe
if you've never talked about it, I wouldn't do it in one night.
You know, maybe it's
a
multi-night thing. Maybe your relationship can handle all of them. Just know kind of what your stopping point is.
Yeah.
But it's also great to, like you said, share it with your spouse ahead of time. Don't like spring it on them. Hey, I want to talk about this. And make sure that maybe you even send them the questions beforehand. Like if you're the only one listening, send them this podcast to listen to, or, text them, say, I listened to this podcast. I'd love for you to listen to it. But if you don't have time, here are the questions that I want to talk about. So that way they can start thinking about it. Because even still, if you're like, hey, I want to go through these questions that I heard on this podcast, and then you're springing the questions on them in the moment, it's still going to be,
they need time.
Yeah, it's just going to be like, kind of, it may be off-putting. It may be more awkward. It, may just be kind of make them clam up. This is a topic that you really kind of have to be in the mindset for.
Yeah.
So
we'll start with number 1 is, what do you need in order to be in the mood for sex? So, again, we're not answering them, but I just think that was huge for me personally to think about and answer, and then know that I have a responsibility too to kind of like get myself in the mood and not just be like, you have to, and if you're not turning me on, then you're not getting any. Like, that's not really fair in a marriage. And so whatever it is to get you relaxed and ready and excited. But knowing that about your spouse can also help be like, cool, do you want to go take a bath? And you want to go do this? Or do you need to, that, and then they're like, oh yeah, I can do that, and start getting in the mood, or whatever their answer is. So again, number 1 is, what do you need in order to be in the mood for sex? And you would ask your spouse that, and then listen, and then maybe they'll ask you, and you'll get to share as well.
Yeah, I mean, the concept of this should be that both of you are answering and responding to this, not that it's just a one-way conversation. Like, you shouldn't be like interrogating your spouse on these questions.
Next question.
It should be both of you are committing to answer all of these questions. And, I think on the topic of this one, what do you need to be in the mood? This is going to be a good self-reflection question. I mean, all of these will be, but this is one that's like, okay, you're going to tell your spouse. So then if you want them to act on that, you have to be ready for them to act on that in the future. If you say, I need to be fully relaxed, can't be, within an hour after eating dinner, like, whatever you say, if they take notes of that, and then that scenario starts to play out, you can't just like shut them down. Like, you have to be like, oh, wow, you're taking the initiative based on exactly what I asked of you, and you have to be ready to go when that time comes. So definitely.
And if you don't know, like you said, give them time to think about it. You may not know, and you might need to come back to this question in a couple days, or next time you are in the mood. Or if it could be simple as like lights on, lights off, or like light a candle, or the music, or no music. Like, just give it some thought instead of just saying like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not in the mood.
Yeah, exactly. So number 2, do you feel comfortable initiating sex? Why or why not? That's kind of a multi-part question there. But yeah, I mean, this one's very important. This is one that impacted our relationship for a long time. And if you've listened to any of our past episodes around this topic, you may have heard us talk a little bit about that. This is an area where we got to a point in our relationship where I personally felt like I was the one initiating. I don't ever like to say always, but
every time.
Almost always.
Oh, no.
And, it got to a point where it was like, it was draining for me because I was always pursuing and not feeling pursued. And so that was a huge key. So asking if they're comfortable is important, but then finding out why or why not. Because then if they are not comfortable, hopefully the other 5 questions we're talking about here, the one we just talked about, what gets you in the mood, and then the other 4 that we're going to talk about will help to give them that formula to say, to help make them comfortable. Maybe they're not comfortable because they feel they're going to be rejected. Yeah. Maybe that's the spot you're in your marriage where there's been so much rejection around this this intimacy area of your relationship that they're like, well, anytime I try, I always get rejected. So no, I'm not comfortable anymore. And so that's going to be a huge breakthrough for you to know that and learn that information about your spouse.
Yeah, because I think you're right. I'll say the word always in this on my side of that, you were initiating a lot. And sometimes maybe we think that's your role, and then I guess it kind of flipped when we were trying to conceive a baby and I started initiating more than not. And that
was routined and scheduled,
That affected our relationship because then it was like we were just so focused on the end result, hopefully, of a baby and not the intimate moment together. And that got exhausting. So we've really talked through this, and I think we've gotten to a good or a better place. And so that's our hope for you. And I think that like follow-up why or why not can also let you know about that person. Like I don't know why, like I wanted to maybe be pursued and all that, but I didn't know how you were feeling when you said, it's exhausting or whatever. I'm like, oh, well, if you're wanting me to pursue you, like I can do that. And so
just give me a baby.
No, that was not. Oh my God. That was totally 2 different seasons.
Hey, is that not what you just said? I was pursuing. Then when you wanted a baby, you pursued me.
Okay, but let's be real. We're done now having kids. I mean, unless God had other plans, but our plans are to be done.
Yeah.
So I think my point of this is, yes, I proved we both are capable of pursuing each other.
Yeah.
But we still had unhealthy extremes of that in different seasons. And we didn't come to like being better at it now without this communication and talking through that instead of like you resenting me for, me just not being aware and you resenting me for just thinking you're just like, got the special sauce.
Accomplish the mission. The special sauce. That's awesome.
So that's a great segue into number 3.
That's gonna be out there forever on the internet, by the way.
Yay! Go viral.
I love it.
But the third question then is, how often would you prefer or expect sex? I think we had to talk about that.
I'm still stuck on this. We're gonna make a T-shirt or something. Like
who would wear that?
Like, guys, I've got the special sauce. Like, there you go.
Okay, you go for that.
Yep. Anyway, back to number 3.
Wear it and tag Marriage Puzzle, please. I want to see it. I was trying to segue because it really was an awkward transition, but back to question number 3 is how often would you prefer or expect sex? I mean, like, yes, when we were making baby, that was more routine, but now I can blink and be like, oh, how long has it been? Like, and I'm good, but there's other people that could be like, oh my goodness, where are you?
Right.
So what is that? People ask us that a lot, like as marriage coaches, newlyweds, or if they're in this dry spell, what is the magic number? And we can't give you that advice. If everybody knew that, then marriages wouldn't fall apart. So this is between you and your spouse, and it's not like we have a perfect number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, like answer to how often we prefer expect sex in a week that we stick to. But we do know, again, I can't answer this right now, but Thomas and I know our range, right? And so we just kind of have this like mental note of like, oh, it's been this, so let's like plan this, get back to the question number 1, get in the mood, like let's make this happen so that it doesn't go where we're like now having to talk about, gosh, because we've already said this is our goal.
Yeah, well, I mean, if this is so important because it's going to be different for every couple.
Right.
Because you're just going to have different
Stages
levels of, libido and stamina, per person.
Kids,
and
no kids, age is a
exactly
factor,
work
so many things,
schedules.
yeah.
Like there's so many. That's why we can't give just a number to say do this and you'll be fine. And so this is why you have to discuss it. This is why our podcast is founded on the foundation of our podcast, I should say, is around communication. And you have to talk about this. You have to have these conversations in your relationship to find your number.
Right.
And it's going to change over time. When we were in that season of, trying to have a baby, it was like, all right, 7 days this week, let's go, and then it's, it changes again, and it can change based on work schedules. And if you can learn that, and then you keep circling back to some of these questions every so often. I mean, I don't even know how often you would need to. I don't want to give you a number on that, but, to just kind of check in, touch base, especially this question, because if anyone starts to feel like, oh man, holy cow, it's happening too much or not enough. I mean, there was a period in our relationship where we had gone at least 30 days and I was like, this doesn't work. And so, you have to have those touch points and continue to those conversational touch points and physical touch points, but the conversational touch points to make sure that you're both still, on the same page.
And side note, some of that was later, like medical things and bed rest because we made a baby,
right.
that we couldn't have sex, and so we even put it on episode like what to do when you can't have sex, because intimacy is the goal.
Yeah.
Right. I know it's not always the magic sauce. The baby, and that like it's talking about this and then connecting with your spouse intimately, but more frequent, I would say, than not.
Right.
Is the magic number.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
because the more you do it, and I learned this because I wasn't always like this. Because if you're the one spouse that is maybe, if it's out of sight, it's out of mind, like it's fine, I'm good. We're best friends, like. But then, like, more and more time can go on, and we were drifting in other areas, and but like the more you do it, the more you like it, the more you want it. Like, it really is a thing. And so I would just encourage you to lean into that and up your frequency. That's not what we're saying. We're just saying ask the question.
Yeah.
But you might be surprised by your spouse's answer, and you probably need to just up the frequency, and other things would align.
You say that, but there could be a set of spouses out there that's trying to do it 4 times a week, and both of them only want it 1 time a week.
That's true.
And they're just not talking about it. And so if they talk about it and realize, oh, once a week's all we both need, easy. And then, like, that's going to change the whole dynamic of your relationship, because you guys are both getting fulfilled that 1 time a week. And then, and don't take this out of context, if someone only quotes that, someone's going to hear us saying only do it 1 time a week. But if that least one couple that only needs that is then fulfilled after that, it's just going to, your relationship is going to blossom in so many other areas. Because like you said, if you're trying to do it 4 times a week just because you think your spouse wants it, you can't read your spouse's mind, newsflash, then you're going to be exhausted and drained in other areas of your relationship too. So number 4, what sexual activities do you enjoy the most? It's a pretty straightforward question to ask. It's going to be a much tougher question to answer, a more awkward question to answer, especially if you've never had these types of discussions before. So again, read these questions ahead of time. Think about it. Write it down. If you don't even want to literally say the words because it's awkward, write it down and let your spouse read it. That's totally fine. And figure it out that way. Might even be a fun little, letter, to write to your spouse. Here are the things that I like, and that could be great. So find the way that works for you in your relationship.
Yeah. Number 5, opposite of that, are there specific sexual acts that make you uncomfortable? You said earlier, you might, but you may not know your spouse's full upbringing, and they might have some triggers that are going to be absolutely stop. And knowing that, talking about that, although that'll be hard, I think is so important so that you're not in the act and saying stop. Because I think then you can totally shut down, have a wedge between you, and you just start resenting this person that had no idea or meant to have you feel that way. And so just as you want to know what are you open to that we can agree on as a married couple, but also what should we not
what's off limits
do, and respect that.
Yeah, because it's, there's that aspect of, being told to stop in the middle of something, which is detrimental for that evening, we'll call it, that session. But there's also the aspect of they may not be comfortable with it, but they're doing it anyway because they know you like it. But it's, again, draining them mentally to have to do whatever that fill in the blank is.
Yeah.
And if they're just, going through with it, but I have to say 99% of couples are probably not going to want to make their spouse do something they don't want to do.
No, they shouldn't.
And they shouldn't, that's that should be the natural human way of doing things. But you also should have the desire to want to care for and please your spouse. And so if you're in that mindset and you're just saying like, well, I got to do this because this is what they want, obviously, that's not necessarily true. Like, you don't have to. You have to have the conversation. Yeah. Say, hey, I really don't like this. This has to be off limits for me because it's physically, emotionally, mentally draining for me, whatever it is. I just can't, and we need to make that off limits, and your spouse should respect that. Yeah, it could go either way.
I think then the ultimate discussion is the final question in this set is, how could we each contribute to making our sexual relationship more satisfying? And I love that. How can we each contribute? Right. So a lot of this is maybe a spouse saying, oh, I want more, I want this, I like to get in the mood this way, or what, I don't want this. And then, you can too. But now, the final question is, how can we each contribute to making our sexual relation, not just how can I please you more? And that might be, you might need to ask and answer that so that you can, determine, but it's just this isn't just your night and then tomorrow's my night. And then it's like in this, you called it a session, but in this one experience, you both can have pleasure. You both can give a little, take a little, that's what the best intimacy should be.
Yeah, and this one does this question, how could we each contribute, circles really well back to question number 1, which was, what do you need to be in the mood? And because how can we each contribute could be outside of the act. If you need something to get in the mood, if that's where we go back to the 5 love languages. If you're not fulfilling your spouse well beforehand in their love language, then getting to this part of the experience is it's not going to be good. And so if they're saying, I need you to bring me flowers more often, I am a gifts, receiving gifts love language, great, set it on your calendar. Do what you need to do and figure that out, so that you can remember that and fill your spouse's tank. If it could be that, it could be like a chore at home. Like, hey, that goes into acts of service, but I hate doing this chore. If you did this chore for me and just took that over permanently, that reduces a lot of my stress and I'd have, so much more energy for you. It can go well beyond just the act. Intimacy is more than just sex. We did a whole episode on that way back when. Go listen to it. And so that will let you know that intimacy is like, you know, the outside, and sex is at the core. And so like sex is the most intimate you can be with your spouse. Beyond that, there's a lot leading up to it to get to there, that, you know, that you can expand on in this number 6 question.
So the goal of this episode was to help give you questions that you can go talk to your spouse about sex.
Yeah, exactly. And so if you ever need any coaching, you know, that, you know, can help guide you through these questions, or just kind of help break the ice, then, you know, we can do that. Check our website out, marriagepuzzle.com. You can schedule an appointment there. We can get a discovery call in and kind of see what you need, what areas of your relationship you need help with, I should say. And make sure you're following us on social. Check us out at Marriage Puzzle on social platforms, and subscribe to this podcast. If this is your first time listening, subscribe so you get notified when a new episode comes out. So we will see you again soon.
See ya.